This conference will now be recorded.
All right, well, welcome everyone. This is the ISPE Hackathon Team B presentation. Next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of the team members between subteam B1 and subteam B2. I am Samantha Marino from subteam B2. I'm a process engineer with Wood, and I'll be presenting on the first half of the presentation, and then Nirupama Patkar will be presenting the second half. Nirupama, if you want to just introduce yourself quickly.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you. I'm Nirupama Patkar. I'm a graduate student at Framingham State University, and I'm in the PSM Biotechnology course there. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. Here we have just an agenda of what we'll talk through during today's presentation. We'll start by going through the problem statement and talking about the situation that was presented to us and the challenges that we need to overcome in this pandemic environment. We'll then present some of the assumptions and the design base for the process that we used. The problem statement was pretty open-ended without a specific process detail, so we needed to come up with something on our own in order to create a holistic solution to the challenges that were presented, and then we can go on to present those solutions. We also wanted to touch on the new process implementation, the way that it is typically done and has been done in the past, with the various people that are involved and how it can be a very lengthy and time-consuming process. Then we'll dive right into the different aspects of these solutions that we'll be presenting on, including tech transfer, qualification, and the GMP environment. We'll then discuss some of the resources that we would need in order to bring those solutions to fruition. And then we'll give a brief summary and opening it up to some questions at the end. Next slide, please. So the area of focus for the process is based around Avexis and the products that they specialize in. So as we know, Avexis is the sponsor of this hackathon, and they're the ones who actually provided the problem statement. So we really wanted to have a design base and base our assumptions around what we think Avexis's process might actually be. And so that entailed taking this as a gene therapy product, because Avexis specializes in rare neurological genetic diseases. So that led us further to the assumption that this is most likely an in vivo gene therapy product. And with in vivo gene therapy, the main process is around the manufacturing of a viral vector. And a viral vector is just essentially the carrier of altered genetic material. And the way that viruses actually function is they specifically target certain host cells and inject their genes into the host cell, which then gets further incorporated into the cell. So in a normal, natural virus, this is not a good thing, but when you can control the genetic material of the virus, it's a very useful and effective tool and a great way to cure and prevent genetic diseases. Next slide, please. So here we have the problem statement that was presented to us with the main objective to be ready for the upcoming audits. So the first audit is the mock audit in July 2021, and then ultimately the FDA audit, which is planned for April of 2022. Within the problem statement, there was also some areas to really focus on, which included the technical readiness, qualification, and then GMP and pre-approval inspection readiness. So we really needed to make sure that we keep the timeline on track in all of these specific aspects to ultimately meet the objective of being ready for the timeline of the audits. With the pandemic taking effect, this timeline has been pushed back. So it's really critical for us to not only get that timeline back on track, but potentially even push it forward a bit where possible. Next slide, please. So some of the additional details within the problem statement itself is that the SMEs have been unable to travel to complete any equipment qualifications in person. The tech transfer and training are both incomplete, so we took that as these tasks were started, but they had to be halted most likely pretty abruptly, as so many of us had our daily operations interrupted in some way. And then the supply chain of resources has also been impacted. So our industry, just like every other industry throughout the world, had some kind of supply chain impact when this pandemic took effect. So the way we decided to actually divide these things up among the two sub-teams was Team B1 took on the GMP and pre-approval readiness aspects, and Team B2 took on the tech transfer and process performance qualification areas. Next slide, please. Here we have some of the assumptions that we made about the process. So as I mentioned earlier, Vexus is involved in gene therapy, and so that's where we geared our main assumption towards. We also made the assumption that there would be multiple manufacturing suites, because typically that's how pharmaceutical and biotech facilities set up their manufacturing, where there would be very similar or identical processing areas to either run different products or start different batches at different times. And then you would have your buffer, media, and utility areas shared amongst the suites. We also took on the assumption that the design phases of this project are completed, because within the problem statement, it pointed that the tech transfer and qualification had started. So we assumed that any design aspects had to be completed already. Within that, we went a little bit further and decided to assume that there was a hybrid stainless steel and single-use facility designed. So this is a common setup, and particularly within gene therapy, single-use is often used. We also made the assumption that there would be extensive instrumentation and automation incorporated throughout the process. So this is a really key assumption that's going to be a big player into actually getting the tech transfer runs done and qualifying the entire process from a remote setting. Again, based on some of the specifics of the problem statement, we assumed all equipment was already purchased and installed. All of the utilities for the process are available. Media and buffer infrastructure is in place. And then on the side of the supply chain, we assumed that fill finish would take place actually right on site to kind of alleviate some of that back end of the supply chain, rather than having any kind of bulk fill and then sending that off somewhere else to get a final fill. We just made the assumption that it would all take place in one place. Next slide, please. So diving a little bit further into the design base itself, again, we assumed all the utilities would be in place, your WFI, purified water, CIP, SIP, etc. Now, as I just mentioned, we assumed a single-use and stainless steel hybrid facility, with the single-use aspect really being incorporated into the main process equipment itself. And one of the main reasons that we decided to do this is because it eliminates the need to CIP and SIP any of your process equipment. And that will significantly speed up your timeline, not only in any startup and qualification aspects, but during the production batches itself. So you don't need to qualify any of your CIP equipment or any of your extensive steam systems. You don't have to rigorously test your process equipment to make sure it's cleaned and sterilized between batches and have any of that downtime. All of that can be skipped during startup. And then when you're actually in production, you can again skip all of those steps and save that downtime of waiting for your results of microbial testing to come back, which can take 3 to 7 days. So you'll be able to produce more product in the end, which is, of course, an ultimate goal. So while single use is great for saving on the cleaning and sterilization aspects, there's also some things to be considered when taking on single use, particularly on the front end and back end of it. So on the front end, you need to make sure that you have capacity to store and hold all of your single-use materials. So all of your bags, tubing, connectors, etc. Now, because we assumed that the design of this facility was already completed, we assumed that that aspect, that consideration of having the warehouse capacity was part of that design. And so that's not something that we really focused on because we assumed it was taken care of already. Along the same lines, we assumed that the suppliers of the single-use materials were involved throughout the design phases. They are aware of the process and that they are able to provide the materials to keep the manufacturing running, and there's no issues on their end. So on the other side of the single use is the back end and the waste to consider. So similarly, in the design of a single use facility, you would typically have waste considerations thought about, and perhaps there would be an incineration aspect here where you can burn your plastic waste to use for dirty steam, or there could be a recycling program to have that plastic incorporated into playgrounds or asphalt. Now, the hybrid aspect came in where we decided to use stainless steel for the media and buffer areas. We did this for two main reasons. One, single-use equipment is typically not large enough for the capacity needed in most of the pharmaceutical biotech facilities for your media and buffer. Those vessel sizes typically range from 5,000 to 10,000 liters, and single-use bags are usually only in the 1,000 to 3,000 liter range. The larger you go, it's also more difficult to handle all the different aspects of single use. So that was one consideration. Also, the cleaning involved around media and buffer is often less vigorous, usually just a hot WFI rinse, and you don't need your harsh acid-base cleaning solutions for the media and buffer. So we were able to use the stainless steel equipment while also capitalizing on the benefits of the time saving when it comes to the cleaning. Next slide, please. So here we just have an overview of a general gene therapy process. You start with your cells from a cell bank, grow them up in a small shaker or spinner before moving on to your larger bioreactors, where you would then allow for the transfection of your desired genetic material to happen before moving to harvest, and then your downstream activities, clarification, purification, filtration, and ultimately fill finish. Next slide, please. So here's just a little bit more detail on the upstream side of it. We really want to make sure that the process is being monitored from the very, very beginning. So ensuring that your cell line is what it is actually supposed to be and monitoring all of your aspects and parameters of your bioreactors. You can use an advanced microscale bioreactor to do this and analyze the cells and virus at certain points using analytical ultracentrifugation, and then eventually moving up to your various sized single-use bioreactors, as shown in the picture on the right, with the single-use bags inside stainless steel shells. Next slide, please. And then typical downstream application with your clarification, purification, and activation, and then your different types of filtration before your fill finish. Next slide, please. And here's just everything all together, a typical viral vector process flow. And this is what we used as our base, again, moving forward into how we're going to really get this process up and running in the pandemic environment. Next slide, please. So before really getting into the details of our solutions, we wanted to talk about the way that new processes are typically done and the time-consuming aspects of all of that. So there'll typically be some simulations run, general make a batch and tech runs involving various people, which would often include operators. There'd be a compressive view of operations while observing different areas of improvement, which would include your inventory levels, demand patterns, supplier lead times, and data integrity. So many different people get involved in this, from the FDA, various levels of your own company management, engineers, SMEs, operators, and potentially even maintenance people. So the more people that come together, It could be an excessive process and it can cause delays. It can stray from the critical things that you need to stay on top of. And if there is not a risk-based approach taken and really focusing on the big ticket items, then it can derail the timeline and lead to the whole process taking months or even years to get a facility up and running. Next slide, please. So how do we make all of this better, and how do we do it all during a global pandemic? Well, we'll start with the tech transfer and what we know. So we know from the problem statement that the tech transfer started and stopped maybe about midway through. We also know that in-person training and runs are very limited. Because of COVID, we know that there are very little or potentially even no in-person training that can happen. And so we need to come up with a solution to complete all of this in a very timely and efficient manner while not being physically on site. Next slide. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to really focus on the design assumptions, and particularly, as I mentioned before, the key design assumption of instrumentation and automation included throughout the process. So if you have all of your instruments and your automated valves and all of that technology providing feedback throughout the process, you'll be able to have a large amount of data collected throughout your tech transfer runs. So you can very easily monitor your critical process parameters, your temperature, your pressure, your pH, and you can see this as the process is running, and you don't need someone physically there to see how things might be changing. You can collect your data over a certain amount of time, you can share it with various people, and analyze to see if any adjustments are needed within the process. This monitoring can take place really anywhere at any time. Minimizing any manual operations of operators is also very important, because then you would need someone there, but if you have everything automated, then you don't need someone there. So having this process analytical technology will really ease on the qualification aspect of things as well. So when utilizing all of this automation and instrumentation and having that database, you'll be showing that your process is repeatable, and it's going to make the qualification really run a lot smoother and really take less time. If there's something that must be done manually or an operator needs to be involved, we could also incorporate a live video feed. So this will allow people to observe anything that might need to actually involve a person. Again, we want to try to avoid that where possible, but sometimes that's not possible. You have to have someone physically there doing something. And then again, another key assumption that we incorporated was that there would be multiple suites. And so only focusing on one production line, one suite, and getting that up and running will allow for any of the nuances to be worked out in that one production line first, so that way when you are ready to take on your other suites, you'll hopefully know anything that may not have gone as perfectly as you would have liked, and so you can get those other suites up and running much quicker. Next slide, please. So when it comes to personnel training, we need to, of course, limit the number of people on site to only critical employees, and making sure that those critical employees are adhering to any of the regulations and guidelines for dealing with the virus, such as social distancing. There's already many rigorous regulations within our industry, such as the detailed gowning procedures. So this would just be one more aspect to work into any of the way that things are done. Also, we can again capitalize on the use of video training and live feed trainings. Operators can record things that they're doing, and it can be talked through and then replayed at different times for different people. This is also a time to think about who exactly would be involved in the startup, what kind of operators you have involved. May not be the best time to bring on someone who's never worked in a GMP environment before. They might require a lot more time to get used to all the protocols and specifics within this industry. So having someone who's been in this environment for many years should be able to pick up on a new process much more quickly and hopefully get things running much more smoother. Next slide, please. moving on to the qualification aspects, we know that there are some pieces of equipment that have already been qualified and that the involved SMEs cannot physically be there to finish the qualification. We assume that all the equipment has been purchased and installed. So now we need to come up with new validation protocols while still adhering to all the FDA regulations that are in place, the IQ, OQ, PQ. But again, as mentioned earlier, really focusing on a risk-based approach and not getting caught up in any of those details that are not absolutely critical to getting everything qualified. Next slide, please. So how exactly are we going to do this? Well, again, we're going to have to take it remotely and do things offline. As just mentioned, the main aspects of your process qualification will be maintained. So your installation qualification, making sure everything is in the right place, there's enough space around, has the proper software, so on. Your operation qualification, ensuring everything is properly calibrated, has the proper alarms, the equipment, instrumentation is all there, the valving does what it's supposed to do. And then your performance qualification checks that everything is running the way it's intended to during your normal operations in a controlled process environment. So by using your process analytical technology during your tech transfer runs, again, as I mentioned before, that will really help your performance qualification be short-circuited, as it should be known already if the process is adhering to all of your URSs and your SOPs, and everything is continuously being monitored. If there's an excursion somewhere in the process, it should be known before a critical limit is ever even reached. If your process is good, then your end product should be good. And then, of course, making sure that everything is properly and rigorously documented to ensure that all of your aspects of the qualification are captured, that can be shared with the necessary people who may not have seen something if there was a live demonstration. I know that this is possible. I actually attended a virtual FAT about a week and a half ago where we had one person from our company up at the vendor site who live streamed with his laptop to multiple people on the team and worked very well, and it was very successful. Talking with others, this is something that will be continuing to be implemented. So making shifts in the way things are done because of the pandemic could actually become the new method for performing certain activities. Next slide.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nirupama Patka. I'll be now focusing on areas of GMP and PAI readiness. GMP is a reproducible process, continuously monitored with high quality end product. The personnel are trained to adhere to the reproducible procedures for consistent manufacturing and safety. The buildings, facilities, and equipment maintenance and other parameters adhere to the company's SOPs on how to address the problems. All components and aspects from raw materials to final products are tracked. Logistics within supply chain are properly monitored. Rigorous documentation, data integrity, traceability are crucial aspects of the process for each batch, essential for future reference and inspections. Next slide, please. GMP readiness considerations. It is critical to stay on top of the latest regulations put out by the FDA. COVID is new for everyone, even the FDA. So they may be changing their procedures as well, and we need to adhere to the latest procedures. It is important for the company to ensure employees and SMEs are fully aware and understand the process and the changes, and thus can easily answer any FDA questions. Next slide, please. Remote monitoring of manufacturing, whether it is the inbuilt equipment monitoring or the visual monitoring, both allow for real-time notification of any problem or anything out of spec. A way to create electronic records of when things are not what they should be. essential for audits and PAI, and an important aspects for supervisors or management who need not be on site but are important in decision making. It also serves as a strong means of communication and documentation. Strong communications are required in this COVID situation as there are a lot of changes in procedures, and strong documentation is required to maintain the quality. Next slide, please. So with solutions in COVID requiring remote communication or monitoring that involves external partners, it means there should be a good collaboration with the SMEs or the suppliers. A required contract might be required to cover this area. The company needs to protect its interest in terms of timely qualification and even secure communication line. There's a need to check whether these changes will also mean more monetary charges. Next slide, please. Governing procedures in GMP. There's a need to restrict the number of employees on site. For the essential employees in the facility, procedures need to be in place to minimize the chances of infection. New procedures need to be written and personnel trained on them. Next, next slide, please. Cloud and communication systems. With the increase in electronic data exchange and storage, the facility will face an increased bandwidth necessity to avoid disruptions and maintain the integrity of manufacturing. When the company will be conducting its computer system validation, a validation of the personal devices will be required. These are the devices the personnel will use at home, and the validation can be possible remotely. As there's a need for cloud platforms, the validation and security measures have to be implemented. Strong validation and rigorous security measures are essential for audits and quality to prove data integrity and authorized access. Both top reasons for FDA Form 483. This system in place will create a good state-of-art communication and monitoring system for the company, a good practice even in normal times for the management on move or for communication with other locations. Next slide, please. Pre-approval readiness. The detailed documentation done during tech transfer runs and qualification will all be electronic and made available to ensure the facility is ready for the FDA PAI. How the quality system, quality assurance system is set up will be presented virtually and prior to official PAI. The inspection will be geared towards the most risk potential aspect of the process to eliminate any unnecessary and time consuming reviews. And risk is handled by the early detection with the process analytical technology, such as continuous monitoring, alarms, and so on. The plan and the agenda for an inspection will be as if it is in person and will include a virtual tour. There will be multiple practice internal inspection to ensure things run smoothly, especially with the virtual inspection, as the company does not want any technical difficulties for the real FDA inspection, and to ensure that the participants are trained and know how to interact with the FDA. Next slide, please. Supply chain. The company would work with other companies to swap non-critical supplies Something non-critical to one company may be critical to us and vice versa. And also work with university for potential supplies as students are not on site or in labs. The supplies would involve raw material to PPE and so on. Also, critical is a partnership that would involve technological companies who already have in place and ready to use supply chain logistics and automation tools. A risk-based analytical cloud platform would provide real-time monitoring of the supply chain and suppliers, a good resource for the company in all time, and an aspect of business contingency plan. Next slide, please. All this will answer the resources required in the company. The company with its proposed solution requires larger storage capacity for data generated, process monitoring software, and maintaining high parameters in data security, and the security of the sharing platform of documentation is crucial and falls on the review of IT. Also, the company will require additional PPE and safety tools like thermometers. Next slide, please. Then finally, in summary, to navigate the challenge posed by COVID-19, we would focus on the crucial aspects of the process and take a risk-based approach to determine what is most risky and critical to address. We would determine critical employees to be on site, such as the operators, and the SMEs to be readily available remotely. Then we would establish the COVID protocol. We can also train people remotely using video demonstration. Next, we can utilize automation for continuous monitoring and tracking of the process and the supply chain. We can use live video feed during runs, and batch production records can be reviewed remotely. Thank you for listening. Next slide, please. And we can proceed now to the question and answer session.
Thank you so much, Team B. So judges, we will operate similar to yesterday. George, we can start with you if you have any questions.
Sure. Nice work, team. One question I had that I jotted down was on some of your assumptions. And you spoke of a hybrid, single-use, and stainless steel approach. Would you be able to, I don't know, roughly break out percentage-wise how much is single-use and how much is stainless in your proposal?
Sure. So we focused on the main process being the large majority of the single use. So I would say probably 60 to 70% would be single use, and then any of your ancillary media buffer utilities would be stainless steel, and then you would be able to have your various connections to the transition from your stainless steel to single use. So it would be a majority single use, which would allow you to really, like I mentioned, save your time. And it would also vary on the actual scale of the process itself. So as I mentioned, there's some restrictions with single use, especially in terms of the size of your, bag holders and your bioreactors themselves. So if this is a very large scale, if you're having, 5,000 liter bioreactors, then single use might not be as realistic. There are 5,000 liter single-use bags, but they're not very commonly used because they're quite heavy and cumbersome to put up. But yeah, I'd say 60 to 70% would be single-use.
Okay, thanks for your answer. The other quick question was around, the recommendation on relying heavily on automation. Are there any specific systems that were explored, or just any other detail you could give us around how to implement this level of automation?
So we didn't dive into the actual specific details of the automation systems themselves. I would think that we would try to incorporate something that is typically done. I'm not sure exactly myself of any of the actual details. I'm not sure if anyone else on Team B could provide any further insight, but that's something that we didn't really dive too far into, but we could check into at a later time.
I can answer that.
Yes, Nirupuma, is that you?
Yes, that's me. Can you hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So for the automation, mainly, though I'm not an expert on the process side, but we are using a lot of data storage and a lot of I would say more remote monitoring for the audits and so on. So here we would, as we said in the supply chain, we would look for a partnership with some of the technological companies already having such systems in place, because this is not time to explore and install new things. So we would prefer companies who already have this in place, like the Amazon Web Services and the Emerson. And this would help with the not only manufacturing, but the supply chain logistic, and to do the real-time monitoring.
Okay,
I have
great. Thank you.
Thanks, George. This is Sarah. I have a question. Can you just talk a little bit about your team dynamic and how you all worked through this problem?
Sure, I can answer that. So we worked as two separate sub teams, B1 and B2. B2 took on, we had an introductory meeting after getting the problem statement where each sub team was to jot some down ideas of how we thought we could answer the problem statement on our own, say if we were two separate teams. After that, we had another meeting which we discussed where we were more comfortable as, because to get both teams to work at the same time as one whole team wasn't going to work. So we followed the recommendations from ISPE and the project to create B1 and B2. B1 felt more comfortable with the GMP and the PAI readiness, while B2 felt more comfortable with the tech transfer and the qualification. So after that meeting, we decided to split on our separate paths and worked on our own for a week. And then for the final week, we worked together to make sure that our assumptions lined up, that our process was cohesive, that there were no discrepancies, to create a final project.
Great, thank you. Good job on your presentation. Thank you, guys.
This is Alice. I've got two questions for you. One, just following up from Sarah's, in terms of what were your biggest challenges in undertaking this assignment? I appreciate, you've had people dropping out and things like that, but other than that, what were your biggest challenges?
Hello, this is Brandon. I think our biggest challenge is mostly finding a time to meet where everybody could attend. We had a lot of meetings where our attendance was pretty sparse, not because people didn't want to participate, just because it's hard to find a time with everybody. Having people, across the country, some people working, some people in school, it was really challenging, I think, to find a time to talk and really collaborate together as a group.
Okay, any thoughts from any other team members?
I would agree with that. With just, having it be a difficult way to really have that brainstorm collaboration. Everyone throws their ideas out where it would be if you were in person. I think that was a little bit more of a challenge as well.
Well, with all the challenges, you did a good job. Well done. I do have a more technical question for you, if you don't mind. On the cost and schedule perspective, okay, did you look or analyze this with view to the I suppose the personnel side of it or the automation side that you just spoke about? The cost and schedule impact. Yeah.
The cost in the terms of new solutions we have given.
Yes, I'm just wondering, did you look at any of the cost implications of, or the cost impact of anything that you were proposing to implement?
I can't talk about the qualification, but we looked at the other parts of the, since there's a change in how we'll be storing the data, how we'll be communicating the data and recording, as that's very essential to the GMP side. And that is why the contracts part was put in, that could have, when you're changing how you're dealing with your SMEs or the suppliers, the mode of communication. So this might need a change in how you would look at the contract, and if there are any monetary charges attached to it.
Yeah, so we didn't dive. I mean, in the time frame that we had, we didn't really dive into the specific details of what cost implications might be around this. Assuming that a lot of the upfront design things had already been taken place, that could lead us to think that maybe if we just harp on the focus of what's been done already, may not increase the cost significantly. So you would have to do some things, maybe have more laptops available and make sure that your connections are really strong and things like that. But we didn't analyze all those specifics in detail too much.
Okay, thank you for the answer.
Hi, this is Vivian. Great job, everybody. I've got two questions. The first one is on the supply chain. I think you mentioned it's about 60% single use. So obviously all of the companies are having the same kind of thought around single use. Any thoughts or considerations as to how you would manage the need for supplies, since they seem to be in short order right now, particularly for bags?
Yeah, so I think back to what we had mentioned in some of the supply chain aspects of potentially capitalizing on partnerships of, if there's maybe someone else who isn't, put something on hold and they have some extra materials available and you might have something that you put on hold that they need, and can potentially ease the supply chain through partnerships elsewhere if the suppliers are really stretched and are saying that they absolutely can't get what you need. But again, we assumed that the suppliers were involved and this is something that they should have had a full awareness to and maybe been preparing for enough already that it's not as huge of an impact as it could be if it was later in the game, per se.
Great, thank you. And the second one, was somebody else wanted to add something? No? Okay, so the second question I had was, what considerations did you, if any, on the people plan in terms of making people feel comfortable coming back onto the site to work on this really important project?
That is where we have added said that the protocols within the company would have to be changed to protect them from infection. And if even the decision makers, we will be relying not on being on site or even the limited, but we do maintain the essential people who will be operating the equipment and all the things within site.
Did you, the essential people, did you alter their time schedules or anything to minimize exposure?
I think that is a question Samantha would be more, since I'm not much in line with the process.
Yeah, so I think that would fall into the, reducing for the personnel on site you would have to schedule people alternatively. We didn't get into actually, any of the scheduling or anything like that, but part of the, having video demonstrations would help in implementing some of these new protocols that Nirupama just mentioned. That would incorporate these new COVID regulations that are going to be part of everyone's daily routine now. So sending stuff out before anyone may even come on site to see what they might expect is something that is kind of implied with some video demonstrations.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? If not, on behalf of ISPE and the task team that was led by Leanna Pearson, we just want to really thank Avexis for the problem statement and the coaches and the judges and the hackers. Everybody's just been amazing in this very first virtual hackathon for ISPE. So we just want to say thank you, everybody.
Hey Debbie, this is one of the coaches. I feel like if we were all in person, that Team B would get a nice round of applause. So I just want to tell them they did a great job, and too bad we can't give you that round of applause in person, but you deserve it.
You absolutely do.
Absolutely, well done.
The round of applause.
Well done.
Well done, everybody. Good job. Thank you.
And thank you all to the coaches on behalf of Team B. It was really great working with you all. And I know for myself, I definitely learned a lot throughout this process. And so thank you for that.
Excellent. Good to hear.
Thank you so much. So we will receive the judges' forms later today, probably into tomorrow as well, if they have jobs. And then we will be tallying results and letting everybody know the overall winner from our first virtual hackathon. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been fantastic.
And sometime next week, the presentation will be on ispe.org, so you can invite your parents and your friends to listen to you and watch you in action. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great job, everyone. Thanks.
Okay, well done. Good evening from Ireland. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Good job, everyone.
Nice seeing you, Alice.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, I hear you, Nissan. Good evening.
Good to see you, Alice. Yeah.
Good to see you too, Nissan.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.